Good evening, friends. The sun is set, and I'm back with another tale from my collection. Tonight, an excerpt of the concept story for my book, Eternal Convictions. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights if you dare, and let me take you into the night with a story I call HeadGames. The sound of people talking was loud in the hallways as men went about their daily business. As background noise, it was a confusing jumble that faded to a dull roar, but if one listened closely to individual voices, picking them out of the din, actual conversations could be heard. Deals were being made as men jockeyed for position, while rumors spread and gossip was shared. People discussed hopes and dreams as they planned for a better future. Michael opened his eyes and looked up at the heavy wire mesh of the walls around him. He was in a holding cell in the high-security wing of the prison, and the constant noise was a welcome change. His own cell was more like a closet where he was hidden away from the world, and the only sounds were the constant blowing of the air vents and his own breathing. Occasionally, a guard would rap on his cell door with a nightstick as he looked in to make sure Michael was still alive. But even this was rare. The cell was 6 feet wide and 8 feet long, with walls made of solid concrete. The only openings were the steel door he received his meals through and the air vents in the ceiling. He was allowed to leave only if he had a visitor or for 1 hour of exercise each day in the exercise yard. Some yard, he thought. The exercise yard was actually a 20 by 20 atrium surrounded on all 4 sides by the walls of the prison. Overhead, steel mesh, not unlike that on the walls around him now, was laid across strong steel beams and welded in place to prevent any chance of escape. Highly unlikely in any event, considering the mesh ceiling was some 18 feet above the paved ground. His world had devolved into a cold concrete and steel ever since that fine spring day he had gone to the bank. Thinking back, Michael remembered the 4 long days he had spent in the holding cell of the courthouse, waiting for the jury to deliver the verdict. Each morning he was shackled, marched to the courthouse, and placed in the holding cell where he waited for the verdict, and each evening he was shackled and marched back to his cell at the city jail. His lawyer had been there most of the first day, expecting a quick decision, but he was called away on business early in the afternoon. After that, he would show up in the morning and talk with Michael a while before giving his cell phone number to the county clerk and leaving to do other business as they waited for the outcome. His lawyer was just about to leave on the 4th day when the word came a verdict had been reached. For a brief moment, Michael relived the joy he had felt when he knew there was a verdict. While he was terrified beyond belief that he would be convicted of the crimes he was accused of, he felt sure that God would not let him take the blame. His joy was short-lived. The jury found him guilty of all charges, sentencing him to multiple life sentences to run consecutively. It meant there was no hope for parole, ever, as he would be dead before having served a fraction of the sentence. The judge declared Michael to be a menace to society, incapable of rehabilitation, and ordered him to be confined in a maximum security prison. When it became clear that he would not be free anytime soon, Michael authorized his attorney to liquidate what little remained of his assets and place the money in trust to be drawn upon as Michael needed it to pay for continued attorney's fees through the appeals process. Money was of little concern to him now, though. Other than personal toilet articles, he was not allowed to have anything else in his cell other than periodicals and books provided by the prison. 2 men began to scuffle in the hall outside the holding cell, and Michael got up from the table to see what was happening. Leaning his forehead against the wire mesh, His vision was relatively unobstructed as he watched the men fight. The guard outside the cell looked anxiously up the hall as he waited for others to come and separate the men, as he was not supposed to leave his position by the gate. He had never been interested in boxing nor any other violent sports, but Michael found himself fascinated by the fight and rooting for the man he felt was the underdog. He noticed the thin white stripe on the men's prison shirts and realized they were trustees, prisoners who were allowed extra privileges for good behavior. He laughed to himself as he realized they were putting their elevated status at risk with this fight, even as he silently cheered them on. One of them kicked a mop bucket over at the other, and Michael turned his face to avoid the spray of soapy water. Looking back at the fight, Michael was aware that he was now wet and felt the water running down the mesh to his fingers where he was holding on. It traced small streams down his hands and arms to wet his shirt sleeves, but he didn't care. A surge of electricity caused him to stiffen, and Michael wondered what was happening as his vision turned white and he lost all control of his muscles. Even though his legs sagged and he could feel his face contorting, he could not let go of the wire. "Hey, buddy, you all right?" the guard asked him over the sound of the fight. Michael heard but could not answer. "Aw, hell, somebody help me here," the guard yelled. "I think this guy's getting electrocuted." Michael heard the words, but they made no sense as his vision faded to black except for a small pinpoint of white. The pinpoint grew larger, and he began to see a face coming closer. The face was laughing cruelly, and Michael could only stare in disbelief. Then the vision changed, and it was as if he was looking at the bank robbery he had been convicted of from one of the security cameras. He could see himself talking to the girl and the man with the gun as the robbery started. It was as if he was reliving it from outside his own body, and Michael wondered if he was dying, as he had heard that one's life flashes before their eyes as they die. He heard the gate to the cell open and felt a hard shove as someone used something to push him away from the wall. Falling to the ground, his vision cleared immediately, and he was confused, but felt fine otherwise. He got to his feet and moved to the chair by the table. The guard was talking to him, but he was thinking about what he had seen and didn't register the voice. "Hey, buddy, just sit right there while I get a medic," the guard said as he used his radio to call the infirmary. "They'll be here in just a few minutes." Michael heard a familiar voice and looked to see what was happening. "What's going on here?" Philip Johnson asked, looking from Michael to the guard. "Michael, are you all right?" "Yeah, I think so," he said quietly. The guard proceeded to tell Philip what had happened, speculating that the water from the bucket must have hit the floor outlet and charged the mesh. They were quickly joined by a medic who checked Michael out thoroughly and pronounced him to be fine. It all seemed to happen very fast, and Michael wondered what was going on. He was aware of the conversation between the guard and his lawyer, but it made no sense to him. He had lost all sense of time. When the medic asked him questions, he was apparently giving the right answers, but in thinking about it, he couldn't remember what was said or even what it was about. Sitting there dazed, he watched the medic leave and the guard resume his post outside the door after closing it and locking them within. Then he realized Philip was talking to him. "So how have you been, Michael?" Philip asked as he opened his briefcase and took out a legal pad and pen. Looking at the pad, Michael was reminded of their first meeting in the city jail. "Not too bad, Philip," he said. "My concentration has improved since I don't have any distractions in my cell." Philip looked at him puzzled for a moment before he realized Michael was being mildly sarcastic. He couldn't blame him. Being locked up like he was would drive anyone mad with boredom. "I'm sorry, Michael." Philip looked him in the eye. "I wish there was more I could do for you." "Well, just get my conviction overturned and I'll buy you dinner." Michael smiled as he thought about being free. "That's why I'm here, Michael." Philip looked grim. You've got my conviction overturned? Michael asked. No, I'm sorry to say, Philip began. The courts have overruled your appeal and upheld your conviction. Then let's get busy filing a new appeal. We have exhausted all of the appeals processes, Michael. Philip looked down at his bare notepad. There is absolutely nothing more I can do except be here if you need me for something else. You mean there are no more appeals? No chance of getting this damn wrongful conviction overturned? Michael couldn't believe what he was hearing. Philip, I have been patient throughout this whole ordeal. I've been good, even when the injustice has driven me so crazy that I actually wanted to resort to violence. And now you're telling me there's nothing that can be done? The guard turned to watch the conversation as he heard what was being said and the tone of Michael's voice. He had seen inmates go off on their lawyers in the past and waited to see if he would need to intercede. Michael was aware of the way he sounded and of the guard's renewed attention. He took several deep breaths to try and calm himself. Philip had done everything for him. It wasn't his fault. I wish there was something I could do, Michael. I know, Philip. Michael looked at him with tears in his eyes. I've begun to think God hates me. Philip almost wished Michael would turn violent. At least then he could leave here knowing he had tried to help and was rejected. It would be far easier to leave a man he cared nothing for to such a fate, but this was killing him inside. He had come to like Michael very much and understood him to be a kind and gentle soul. There was no doubt in his mind that he had not done the things he was convicted of, but he could do nothing. He felt helpless. God doesn't hate you, Michael, Philip said quietly. As you told me all along, God has a purpose for you, and we are not privy to what that purpose is. You know, Philip, Michael wiped his face dry with his sleeve, I've always believed, and I guess I still do, somewhere deep inside, that God has a plan for all of us, and we are but some part of the grand design. But for the last 2 years, as I've waited for the appeals process to bear me out, I've seen nothing that could be accomplished by my being taken from the world where I was helping people and placed in a cold concrete and steel box where I have no contact with anyone whatsoever for 23 hours of each day. How could I serve even the smallest purpose here? He looked at Philip for an answer that neither of them had. I was always fond of saying that no one is worthless, as they could always serve as an example of what not to do. But even that has no meaning here. Michael, when we met, I was skeptical of your story, but as I checked it out and found what you were telling me to be true, I learned to not take things only as I saw them. Philip put the notepad back in the briefcase. I have never been a religious man, but watching you through this ordeal has given me hope. You have demonstrated such faith and patience as I never witnessed before, and it shows me there is a higher power at work in our lives. Will I see you again, Philip? Michael asked. If I have no reason for legal counsel, will you still visit? For the first time in his life, Philip found he did actually want to return to visit with one of his clients, even if his legal services were not needed. Money was not the concern here. He had found something in Michael that had been missing in his life, and he felt that. Even though he had failed to free an innocent man, he had made a true friend. Yes, Michael, Philip swallowed hard. You've given me hope, and perhaps even faith. I can't say when or how often, but I will visit, and I will answer any letters you send. Thank you, Philip. Michael reached out and squeezed his hand. For everything. There was no need for goodbye. Both men had reached an understanding of what they needed from each other, and the moment left them filled with emotion that threatened to overwhelm them. Philip grabbed his briefcase and turned to leave as the guard opened the gate for him. Michael sat for a few minutes looking at the area around him as he waited for the guard to take him to his cell. It was standard procedure for visitors to clear the holding area so the gates could be secured before prisoners were allowed to move about. There was nothing new to see, but still, he studied every detail of his surroundings. Once he was back in the cell, there would be nothing to look at or distract him from the endless hours of nothing. He had already read the book he was given so many times, he had committed it to memory, and there was no telling when he would receive a new one. "All right, Chase, let's go." The guard held out his hand to take Michael by the elbow and lead him down the hall. Michael resigned himself to his fate and trudged along silently until they came to the entrance of his wing and walked on past. "Where are we going?" he asked, looking around. "You've been transferred to a new wing," the guard said, and continued to lead him. They seemed to walk forever before coming to a gate where he was halted as the guard on the other side opened it. The guard who was leading him guided Michael through, but did not follow. Instead, he pulled the gate shut and locked it as the new guard led him down the new corridor. It had no openings on either side, but he could see a small point of light at the very end. As they drew closer, Michael could see that the door actually led outside the building, and he wondered just how far he was being transferred. His senses were assaulted as he stepped outside into the sunlight. For 2 years, he had seen only the sky above the exercise yard, and no hint of sun, as the large structure of the prison kept the yard in shadows at all time. Now he smelled a wide variety of plants, and marveled at how the sun felt on his face. It was like being born anew, and Michael let himself revel in it. He was guided onto an electric cart and driven across the compound. He no longer cared where they were going, as he was busy looking at the world. In the distance, he could see the mountains with their snow-covered peaks, but he did not let himself sink into despair with thoughts of never being able to go to them. Instead, he studied them and everything else he could see to form images in his mind. Once he was led back indoors, there was no telling when he would set foot outdoors again, if ever. The cart came to a stop outside the steel door of another building, and Michael was led from the cart. For the first time since he had been first arrested, Michael resisted the guard and stopped walking halfway from the cart to the door. "Let's go, Chase," the guard said menacingly. "Just a second, buddy," Michael thought quickly. "Do you think maybe I could have a quick smoke before we go in? I haven't had one in over 2 years. Michael didn't smoke. Hadn't for years. But he had seen the cigarettes in the guard's pocket and knew it would give him 10 more precious minutes outside. "Yeah, sure, why not?" The guard offered him a cigarette and raised the pack to show a guard in a nearby tower. "I was about to go on break anyway. Now don't try anything, Chase. There are guards on the towers around us, and this is a shoot-to-kill zone." "I won't," Michael said calmly. He had no intention of trying to escape, and in fact, the thought had never crossed his mind. He sucked at the cigarette as the guard lit it for him and found himself in a violent coughing fit as the acrid smoke seared his throat and lungs. He wondered why people would do this to themselves and claimed they even liked it. "I guess it has been a while, huh?" the guard laughed. "Take it easy. It'll come back to you." It seemed to take forever to get his breathing calmed down, but once he did, Michael continued to smoke the cigarette. The taste was nasty, but he did enjoy the light buzz he was getting from the nicotine, and decided that this must be what smokers liked about cigarettes. He let the sensation wash over his senses as he looked around, taking in the scenery. The prison was a very large complex. The fences in the distance looked very small, but he remembered from his arrival that they were at least 20 feet tall and topped with razor wire. The main prison building he had just left was nearly half a mile away, but still loomed very large, giving perspective to its size. To the east, he could see the yellow fields of the plains stretching away towards Kansas, and to the west were the mountains. He seemed to be located in a large bowl, as the mountains curved around to encompass part of the north and the south. He took one last drag of the smoke and dropped it to the ground where he crushed it out. The guard had also finished and nodded toward the door. Silently, they walked over to the steel door and waited for the guard on the other side to open it. As Michael entered, he noticed a sign beside the door which read, "Medical Receiving," and wondered why he was being led through a delivery entrance. Michael looked around at the holding cell he was placed in after arriving at the new prison building. It was small, about 3 feet by 3 feet with a barred door. It was like a broom closet in which a bench had been placed, and there was no room to lie down or even stretch his legs, unless he stood. He hoped he wouldn't be in here for too long. Across the hall was a well-lit room with medical supplies and an examination table. It was clearly some kind of clinic or infirmary, and the open door was directly across from his cell. Occasionally, he would see a nurse enter through a door at the back of the room to do something out of his sight before leaving the way she came. His view was very restricted, and he could only see about 8 or 10 feet to either side of the cell he occupied. He was aware that the air smelled of disinfectant and clean linens. He recalled his old cell and the silence there. That had been loud compared to this place, as there was not even the sound of air being moved mechanically. He could hear his own breathing, and though he was calm, it seemed very loud. Listening carefully, he thought he could even hear his own heartbeat, but dismissed this, realizing he must be hearing his own pulses in his ears. Michael thought about his meeting with Philip and the strange event which happened just before he arrived. The guard said he was electrocuted, but as a technician, Michael had been subjected to many electrical shocks over the years, and this was nothing like that. There had been a current running through his body, but it was not electrical in the sense he knew. It was more like his blood was on fire and had grabbed hold of every muscle in his body. The vision of the bank robbery was confusing, but knowing he had been at the bank during the robbery and seen the videos during his trial, he decided he must have been reliving it. The only logical explanation was that the stress from waiting to hear about his appeal had triggered some type of seizure. He remembered how his vision had went all white and then faded to black before he saw the vision. The only thing he couldn't explain was the man's face he had seen, as it looked like no one he had ever known or could recall seeing. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, and Michael looked to see who was coming. A small man in a white lab coat, who he presumed was a doctor, accompanied by a guard who led him here, stopped in front of his cell. "Chaste," the guard spoke evenly but firm. "The doctor needs to examine you for long-term incarceration in this facility. We're going to go into that room across the hall. Normally I would have to handcuff you, but you've been cooperative so far. Can we keep it that way?" Michael nodded and stood up. "Yeah, thanks." The guard opened the gate and allowed Michael to step out. He motioned with his arm to the room across the hall, and Michael went where directed. "Have a seat on that examining table," the doctor said as he turned to retrieve a cart with medical instruments. Michael sat on the table, feeling like he would slip off as the white paper covering it moved under him. He looked at the cart the doctor was pushing. There was a blood pressure machine, digital thermometer, a jar of tongue depressors, a box of latex examination gloves, and several other items he recognized as general practitioner's tools. The only thing that seemed out of place was the hypodermic syringe, but the needle was a very small gauge, and he decided it must contain a flu shot or something similar. "Please remove your shirt," the doctor said as he put on his stethoscope. Michael did as asked and handed the shirt to the guard, who laid it on the chair for him. For the next 30 minutes he was poked and prodded, and blood was drawn with a much larger syringe he had not noticed behind one of the machines on the cart. He wasn't afraid of needles, but the large gauge had unsettled him. He watched as it was inserted and a vial was attached to collect his blood. The doctor pressed a gauze pad to the wound when he was finished and instructed Michael to keep it there with his other hand. As they finished up, Michael heard footsteps in the hall and looked up to see a tall man in a suit enter the room. He was very self-confident and moved around looking at things as if he owned them. "We're ready, sir," the doctor said, and stepped aside so the man's view of Michael was unobscured. "My name is Warden Dempsey, Mr. Chase." He looked at Michael straight in the eye. "You are here because you were convicted of crimes against society so brutal that a judge deemed rehabilitation impossible, and every appeals court which heard your case upheld the decision. There are no more appeals, and no chance for you to ever leave this prison during the course of your natural life. Therefore, you were transferred here, to me, to be entered into the Eternal Convictions program." Michael was already completely aware that he had no chance to ever leave prison, but the cold tone of the warden drove the fact into him once again like slivers of glass. He knew that there was no escape from this nightmare, and hoped at the very least to be treated civilly as he served his sentence. There was no use proclaiming his innocence anymore. As the man had said, all appeals were exhausted. He felt as though the warden's words had sucked the life from him, as the judge's had when he pronounced his sentence. "This facility is operated entirely autonomous from the main prison where you have been to this point. Here, there are no visitors, no computers, nor any other contact with the outside world. For all practical intents and purposes, you are deceased. Even the IRS will not contact you here, so you may take joy in that fact." The warden smiled at his own joke. "What there is, though, is order. I run an orderly prison here with no problems. You have been cooperative thus far, and I expect it shall remain so, as I have no tolerance for any disobedience. Can I count on you for this, Mr. Chase?" Michael looked at the man for a moment and knew immediately that he despised him. Far beyond the fact that he, himself, was a convicted felon and expected to be treated poorly, this man was the type who thought himself above the rest of the world and carried himself as such. Michael respected his position, but not the man. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "Very well," the warden continued. "In order to preserve order, we take certain precautionary medical measures to prevent aggression. The doctor is now going to give you an injection to facilitate this." Michael was aware that the doctor had picked up the small syringe from the cart and was tapping air bubbles from it as he squirted some of the liquid into the air. He held it at the ready, waiting for the order to continue. "Proceed, doctor," the warden said, and turned to leave. Reaching the door, he turned back as if having forgotten something. "This will be the last time we meet, Mr. Chase. Please enjoy your stay with us." As quickly as he appeared, the warden was gone, and Michael was left to the doctor and guard. He looked from one to the other, as if expecting an apology for the warden's intrusion, but neither man even changed their expression. It was time for the injection, and he made himself relax as the doctor approached. He felt the needle enter his upper arm and wondered just what he was receiving. The warden had said it was to prevent aggression, and Michael wondered if he was being injected with hormones to inhibit testosterone production, or perhaps it was estrogen to enhance his inner calm. He really hoped it was neither, as self-gratification was one of the only releases he had in prison, and he wasn't particularly fond of the idea of growing breasts, as the other guys might take an undesired liking to him. He had no more than completed this thought and was about to ask what he was injected with when he realized he knew already. His vision blurred and a deep fog began to settle over his mind. Suddenly he was very tired and could feel his entire body relax. As he passed out, Michael realized he'd been given a sedative. Everything seemed to be moving slowly, and he couldn't understand why everything seemed out of place. Michael looked up from the bench where he was working to see his girlfriend coming toward him through the door. She was carrying something that looked like plans, and he wondered why, as she had never had anything to do with his work. In fact, he had not even seen her since before he began doing electronics work, and wondered why she was here. But decided he didn't care. He was happy to see her. She laid the plans on his desk and told him to hurry up or they would be late picking up the kids. She seemed upset, and he wondered why, while at the same time, he wondered what she was talking about, as neither of them had children. He followed her through the door and into a large area he could only describe as an inner courtyard with a driveway passing through it. In the center was a large fountain made of very old white marble, and water streamed down from the center in a heavy flow, cascading over terraced ledges to the catch basin, which was overgrown with weeds. Looking around, he realized the landscaping had been long neglected, as grass protruded randomly in tall yellowing bunches at joints of the paved stone sidewalks and driveway. The area was surrounded by a red brick wall of some 10 feet in height, and this was also overgrown with vines and weeds. The mortar seemed to crumble in places, and small bunches of plants sprouted from the cracks. In a far corner, a faded white gazebo stood in a shroud of plant life, with its gray wood roof shingles covered in moss. Atop at the peak, a wind vane shaped like a rooster pointed its scaly green arrow at the gates where the driveway entered. Beyond the gate and along the outside of the brick walls, heavy forest shut out the sun. "Come on, or we're going to be late," she called to him. "Mother wants to rebuild this place and has decided to rip out all of the sheetrock in the east wing to make sure the structure is sound." He followed her across the courtyard and through a set of double doors, back into the house. He had no idea where they were going, or even where they were, but felt the need to continue following. "This room is going to be the new family room," she said, walking around a large wooden structure in the middle of the room. Michael looked down and saw that there was no floor here, but rather bare earth with rough sandy texture. The floor was uneven as well, with the outer edges raised where they walked and dipping down in the center under the wooden framework. None of this made sense, and as he looked at the large structure in the middle of the room, it looked to him like the skeleton of a large boat which had either been built here or unearthed as the building was erected around it. As he walked around the end and saw her moving toward the back, her mother entered through a set of French doors to his left, followed closely by several children. He did not recognize the children and heard her say something about rebuilding the house since her husband had died. In his mind, he knew this wasn't right, as his girlfriend's mother had passed long before her father, and they had lived in a very small house. None of this made any sense, but he suddenly felt an urgent need to talk with his girlfriend, if she would ever stop walking away from him. "I need for you to talk to me," he said, pleading. "We have plenty of time to talk. You're not supposed to be at the prison until Thursday." She smiled and continued to walk around the framework away from him. "That's not right," he said. "I'm going to be gone before you even realize, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to see you again." Michael heard the words he was speaking, but had no idea what he meant or why he felt it so urgently. One part of his mind knew that he had parted ways with her years before, but another part said he needed her to stay with him now because he was about to face something terrible, and she was the only one who had ever understood him. "Don't be silly," she smiled coyly. "I'll always be here." She walked around the back of the framework, and he went back the other way to intercept her. Coming face to face, he put his hands on her shoulders and looked deep to her eyes. It was strange, but he could not see the love he knew should be there. Instead, he felt she was mocking him. "I don't know how I'm going to get through this," he pleaded. "I've done everything I could, but nothing seems to work." "It's all being taken care of," she reassured him. "What's being taken care of?" he tried to ask, but the words would not come. Suddenly, Michael's neck was sore, and he couldn't speak. She started to walk away from him again, and when he tried to follow, he found he couldn't move. In fact, he couldn't even turn his head to see where she was going, but had to follow her with his eyes until she was out of his sight. He tried to call to her, but no words came, and he wondered what was happening. "There, that should do it," he heard her say. "Doctor, we have rising activity on the EEG. The patient is waking up." Michael tried to look and see who the doctor was and who was talking to him, but still could not move his head. He was stuck looking out of an old multi-pane wooden window at an overgrown garden. "I got it," she said, and then everything went black. Opening his eyes, it was dark, and Michael sensed he was sitting up rather than laying down as one expected to be when sleeping. His neck was sore, and when he tried to move his head to relieve the tension, he found it impossible. He wondered if maybe he were still dreaming, and tried to will himself to wake up, but nothing changed. He thought maybe if he pinched himself that would work, but he could not feel his hands, or the rest of his body for that matter. At the back of his neck, a dull pain throbbed, as if tension had built up and he needed to pop his neck. It wasn't sharp pain, but rather irritating, and he thought he would go mad if he didn't find a way to relieve it. Finding himself immobile with no way to relieve the tension, Michael changed his thoughts to take his mind off of it. Remembering the visit from the prison warden, Michael recalled the man saying that certain precautionary medical measures were taken to prevent aggression, and wondered just what had been done to him. He thought about what he knew of that could be done to prevent aggression, and other than his earlier thoughts of reduced testosterone levels or increased levels of estrogen, he could think of nothing which would require immobilization. "Unless they castrated me," he thought suddenly, and wished he could reach down to feel if his parts were still intact. But he wasn't a sexual offender, so that didn't really make sense. This thought calmed him, and he continued to search his mind for answers. Michael's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming closer. He couldn't see anything, but he felt someone had come into the room with him. The lights came on, hurting his eyes, and Michael squinted to shield them. He could hear the other person moving around, but had no idea where they were or what they were doing. Finally, he could open his eyes fully and saw immediately that he was in a white room, not unlike the one where he had received the shot. The wall in front of him was bare except for the mortar joints of the cinder block it was constructed of, and a small stainless steel rolling cart parked directly in front of him. "So, are we awake yet?" a man's voice asked. Michael tried to talk but couldn't. A face popped up in front of him, grinning at him in a weird way with eyes bulging. This guy was way too happy. "How you doing, Michael?" he asked with a rather high, effeminate voice. "Did you sleep okay?" Michael tried once again to answer, but no sound came forth. In fact, he could not even feel his breath moving through his mouth. "It's okay, Mikey boy. I know you can't talk, but what you can do is blink your eyes. So when I ask you a question, just blink once for yes and twice for no, okay?" Michael blinked once. Very good, Mike, he said in a patronizing tone. Now, the first thing we need to do is make sure you are okay. So I'm going to pull up a seat and we'll go over a few things. He stepped away from Michael's view for a moment and returned carrying a clipboard and pushing a stool. He sat on the stool with a flourish, reaching down to adjust himself at the crotch, and Michael found himself wishing he could do the same thing. All righty then, let's continue, shall we? He said with a broad grin, cocking his head to one side. Remember, blink once for yes and twice for no. Michael blinked once to acknowledge he understood. Awesome! Now let's see, he said, flipping up a page on the clipboard. Are you in any pain? Michael thought for a moment of how to answer. He wasn't in pain, but he was very uncomfortable with a dull throbbing in the back of his neck. He blinked 3 times. Well, okay, Mike. I see we have some work to do. He sat up straight and laid a finger to the side of his mouth. You blinked 3 times, which is neither yes or no. So it means something else, right? Michael blinked once. Okay. I asked if you were in pain, and you didn't say yes. But you also didn't say no. So you're not in pain, but you don't feel good. He looked to Michael quizzically. Michael blinked once. Oh, good. We're making progress. He clapped his hands together and smiled broadly. Is it a headache? Michael blinked twice. All right. Does your neck hurt? Michael blinked once, paused, then blinked twice. Oh, I see. Yes and no. He maintained the silly grin. Your neck is uncomfortable. Michael blinked once. Let me see if I can help. He reached around behind Michael's head and began to massage the back of his neck. Michael felt the warmth of the man's smooth hand as he massaged, and soon the knot began to relax. Looking at his new friend, Michael wondered what had brought someone of such a personality to work in a place like this. His blond hair was shoulder-length and stringy, but time had not been nice as he was mostly balding on top. He had a very large, rather pointed nose that sloped steeply back to his eyes. Up close, he could see the eyes were somewhat sunken in, and there were large dark circles around them, indicating the man did not sleep well. But what really got him was the smile. A goofy grin with his large but well-maintained teeth. How's that? He asked, removing his hand. Michael blinked once. Good. Now let's get on with the other questions so we can start to get you settled in. He looked at the clipboard. Do you have any other pains? Michael blinked twice. That's great. A lot of times, guys come out of surgery like you did, and they have headaches or other pains, and there's not much I can do but give them a painkiller. He noted something on his chart. Now, your neck doesn't hurt now, but it may start to as the healing progresses, so I want you to let me know if it does, and we'll take care of it. Michael blinked once. Oh, by the way, he looked serious at Michael for a moment, my name is Peter, and I'll be the one who takes care of you from now on. There is another attendant by the name of Marco who comes in late at night, but he doesn't do much other than make sure the equipment is running right. Marco is, how should we say, a little strange. And then there's Natalie. You already met her, the nurse who got the room ready for you when you first got here. Michael thought about the nurse he had seen. He didn't really see her well, but figured it didn't matter as there would be plenty of time for that. What he did remember, though, was she had a great body, and it was something to look forward to seeing again. Anyway, Michael, we run in 3 shifts here. Natalie works 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., I work 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and Marco works 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So there is always someone here to see that you boys are taken care of. Okay, do you have any questions? Michael blinked twice. Peter reached around to one side of Michael's head and pulled a very thin computer monitor around for him to see, angling it off to one side so as not to block Michael's view forward, but still easily seen. The screen was divided into several parts which looked to be medical monitors and a small box in the lower corner which reminded Michael of a chat box he and his friends used on the internet. "This is your life support monitor, and it also serves as a way for you to communicate with me." He reached up to adjust a small object at the top of the screen. "I need for you to look directly at this point for a few minutes, Mike, so I can calibrate it." Michael looked at the point indicated where Peter's hand rested. There was a small beam of light emitting from a very tiny hole, and he could also see a picture of his eye coming into focus on one part of the screen. He realized it was a camera of some sort. "This is an optical mouse," Peter explained. "It follows the iris of your eye so that once calibrated, wherever you look on the screen, the mouse pointer will follow. And, like a mouse, you can click on the menus, but instead of a finger, you simply blink twice rapidly to click the mouse." Michael watched as Peter continued to calibrate it and saw a mouse icon appear on the screen. "There we go," Peter sat back satisfied. "Now, Michael, I need for you to look at the screen and look at what I tell you to so we can make sure the mouse is calibrated." Michael blinked once and turned his eyes to the screen. He watched the mouse rove the screen as it followed his eye movements. "Look at the blue circle," Peter instructed. Michael searched the screen and looked directly at the blue circle in the corner as the mouse followed to rest there. "Good! Now find the red box." Michael looked across the screen, the mouse icon following his eye until he found the red box. "Excellent! Now let's do a little more. Find the word menu and click the mouse." Michael looked until he found the word menu above the small box which resembled a chat box. He waited for the icon to settle on the word and blinked twice. A small box slid down with menu choices, and he read them, the icon following his eyes across each one. "Okay, Michael, this is your communication interface. From here, you can type messages in the box below by opening the keyboard on the menu." He reached over and pushed a button on the screen to make the keyboard appear on the screen above the chat box. "At first, your eyes are going to get very tired as you type messages, so don't try to do a whole lot at first. As time passes, your eyes will become accustomed and grow stronger." Michael looked at the interface and wondered just how long he was going to have to use this. The way Peter was talking, this would be his only means of communication for a long time to come. Just what had they done to him to make it so he needed to be immobilized for such an extended period of time? "Now, if you'll look up here for a moment," he pointed to an exploding star symbol at the top of the screen with a small black box under it. "Before you are finished healing, there are probably going to be times when you do have pain, and since we won't always be around to know, you can simply click this icon and get a small dose of painkiller. After it is administered, the counter will appear in the box below the icon so you will know when the next dose is available." Michael blinked once. "But I gotta warn you, Mike." Peter got real close to Michael's face, and he could smell his aftershave. "The painkiller is a strong narcotic. The computer will only let you have a dose every 2 hours, but that is still enough to get you addicted. Once the doctor determines you're healed, the painkiller will be removed, so don't get yourself hooked on it. I've seen a couple guys do this, and believe me, the withdrawal is very painful, and there's nothing we can do but watch you suffer through it as you quit cold turkey." Michael blinked once. He wasn't interested in the painkiller. In fact, other than aspirin, he wouldn't take any medications when he was free unless a doctor prescribed an antibiotic for infections. "Okay, Michael, I'm about to get off shift, so let me show you one more thing before we stop for today. On the menu, you'll find the heading Games. When you select it, you are given a choice of several different computer games which can be played with the optical mouse." He looked at Michael and grinned proudly. "These were my ideas, and I programmed them in so you guys wouldn't get too bored. I know it must really suck to be immobilized like that." Michael blinked once. "So anyway, I would suggest trying one of the simple games like tic-tac-toe or hangman at first, until your muscles get used to using the optical mouse. Also, The games will turn off for 15 minutes of every hour in order to prevent eye strain and headaches that can result from these. He stood up and moved the stool over against the wall. I gotta go now, but I'll be back in the morning. Get some sleep and play with the games if you like. Marco will come and check on you before too long. Michael watched him walk out of sight, listening to his footsteps fade in the distance. Suddenly, he felt very sleepy, and questions of his situation no longer seemed important. He looked at the computer screen for a moment and decided he would check it out further later on. Right now, he needed to rest. He closed his eyes and waited for sleep to come. But sleep did not come, as he could not make himself feel comfortable enough to sleep. The familiar pressure against his back or side of his head when he lay down was missing, and he had the ever-present feeling of sitting at attention. He opened his eyes and looked at the computer screen, considering if he should dose himself with a narcotic to induce sleep. He immediately decided against it as he remembered Peter's warning about not becoming addicted. He would have to find some other way. Wondering how he would deal with his inability to make himself sleep, Michael became aware of a squeaking sound. Very faint at first, but it was slowly getting closer and louder. He wondered what it was and wished he could turn his head to see, as he could really only hear it out of his right ear. This meant the sound was originating in the hallway, as that was the way Peter had gone when he left. The noise came even closer, and now Michael could hear footsteps walking in time to the squeaking, as if the irritating noise was a marching cadence. As it shifted around his position, he watched as a gurney came into view being pushed by a very strange-looking man. He assumed that this was Marco, and knew the gurney was not for him, as there was already someone laying on it, covered entirely by a white sheet, and Michael found himself wondering why the person under the sheet seemed to have no head. Well, looky here, he said mockingly, as spittle gathered at the ring in the corner of his lower lip. If it isn't the big bad bank robber who killed all those people in cold blood. Not feeling so tough now, are you, dude? Michael tried not to let the man's words get to him. He had been taunted by guards and even other inmates before who didn't believe he was innocent. This time, unlike those other times though, he had no choice but to keep silent. So you're Michael Chase. You don't look so tough. He leaned in very close. In fact, you look like a little bitch. That's right, you heard me, bitch. The man's breath was horrible, and Michael found himself wondering if this guy chewed on roadkill at meal times. He had short, greasy black hair, an eyebrow piercing, the lip ring piercing he had noticed at first, and a tattoo on his neck of a flying bird which looked to Michael like a swallow. Oh, the fun he could have with this guy if he had his voice and was not incapacitated. So, I guess Peter got you all hooked up on the monitor since it's pulled around now. Enjoying them drugs, dude? He looked at the screen. Oh, you haven't taken any yet, huh? He walked out of Michael's sight to the left and could be heard moving something around in a drawer. When he returned, he was carrying a small, thin strip of something clear like tape. Okay, Mike, here's the deal. Since you can't talk or even really communicate yet, let me give you the rundown. He pulled the rolling bench over and sat in front of him as Peter had done. Open your mouth. He held the strip close and laid it on Michael's tongue. The taste was very sweet, and he realized it was also dissolving slowly. Whatever it was, he liked it. That, my friend, is a treat for you, Marco said calmly. I know I can come off all badass and all, but I really feel for you because it has to be one major bummer to be in your position. I don't really care if you wasted a bunch of people. Hell, I'd waste people too if I could get away with it. Most of them are worthless as tits on a boar hog anyway. He spun around in the chair as if making a point. Fact is, I don't think there's any crime in the world so bad that you should have to be treated this way. But I don't make the rules. I just exploit them. He got up from the stool and headed off around the room again. Michael could hear him running water in the sink and sloshing something around, but had no idea what was happening. Again, he wished he could turn his head. After a few minutes, Marco came back and sat down. There were now dark blotches on his smock. So like I was saying, I exploit the rules to get what I want out of this crummy job. But I really can't complain. I come to work about the time all my friends are passing out, and I get off in time to sleep before it's time to party again, so it's cool. Marco lit a cigarette. Hope you don't mind if I smoke. I'm not supposed to, but there's nobody here at night but me and you guys. He sat back and inhaled deeply from the cigarette, and for once Michael could imagine what it was smokers got from smoking as he recalled his last smoke. The smell in the air was actually a pleasant change from the sanitary smell of cleaners, disinfectants, and purified air. He watched Marco smoke and play with the cigarette. He was a strange one, but seemed to have a certain quality that Michael found he could like. So, dude, I guess you met Peter. Marco looked him straight in the eye. Is that dude a flake or what? Man, the first time I saw him, I was thinking to myself, dude, there's a weird one if I ever saw one. And what's with that hair? I mean, come on. If you're bald on top, you don't let the sides and back grow. He looks like he tried to jump up too fast and his head pushed through the top of his scalp. He jumped up abruptly and did a little dance, ending up leaning back against the body on the gurney. He reached back and patted the stomach. Wow, that's pretty muscular. He pulled up his shirt to reveal a small paunch and rolls. I wish I was that muscular. The chicks would really dig it. He walked to the far side of the gurney and lifted the sheet up between them. Holy shit, he exclaimed. Man, you were hung, weren't you, buddy? Talk about a trouser snake. It's like a damn boa constrictor. Michael could hear the sound of slapping and wondered just what Marco was doing to the body. He watched as he dropped the sheet and walked over to lean in close. Dude, you were really something, weren't you? He smiled and reached out to touch Michael's nose gently. I bet the ladies loved you. Michael was confused. What was he talking about? Seeing his confusion, Marco walked over to the body and whipped back the sheet. Reaching down, he grabbed hold of the body's penis and lifted it for Michael to see. Man, do you know what I could do if I was hung like that? He smiled and seemed lost in his own perverse joy. I could have any woman I wanted. Michael felt wrong. He couldn't say watching Marco manhandle the obviously dead body made him sick, because he felt nothing of the sort, but it did feel wrong. Oh, I get it now, Marco said slowly. You still don't know what's really going on yet, do you? Michael blinked twice. Oh yeah, Peter taught you the blinking thing. Good. He walked out of sight, returning with something in his hand. Okay, let me lay it out for you, Mike. Part of my job is to take the bodies to the incinerator here and cremate them, which is what I was on my way to do when I stopped in here to see you. Being that you're new and all, I thought, what the hell, let's take some time to get to know the new guy and maybe have a little fun. So here we are in this damn cold-ass prison, just the two of us in a plain white room with a stiff. Except the stiff isn't just any stiff, it's you. Michael was completely confused now. What did he mean the stiff was him? He was right here looking at him and being talked to, so how could the dead body be him? Still confused, eh, Mike? Michael blinked once. Okay, maybe I should ease you into this and let you know what my job is really all about. He sat on the stool and lit another smoke. I come in here every night, and aside from cremating stiffs, I also maintain all the life support equipment that keeps you guys alive. I mean, there's the blood oxygenation recirculator, which acts like a heart to keep blood flowing to the brain, and the feeding solutions which are added to the blood to make sure you have the nutrients you need. That's the easy stuff. Then there's about 10 other solutions that have to be added to the blood continuously, since you don't have the organs to make them. And of course, the blood is also then continuously cleaned so you don't get infections or blood poisoning. I'm telling you, Mike, it's like maintaining a whole laboratory for each one of you guys, and I do it all myself. He turned and looked at Michael seriously. If it weren't for me, I'd be cremating all of you. He got up and walked to the end of the gurney and began to push it toward the door opposite where he came in. "I'll be back in a few minutes, dude," he called back. Michael thought about everything Marco had just told him and tried to grasp the point that was alluded to but never made. It was as if he was supposed to understand something that was beyond his comprehension, and he couldn't put it all together. He had said the body was him, but how could that be when he was still right here and the body was now on its way to be cremated? "Okay, dude, I'm back," Marco said, entering the room. He came back and sat on the stool once again. "So did you figure it out yet?" Michael blinked twice. "Man, I don't know whether you're just not that smart or just in denial." Marco sat back and moved something around in front of him. "Okay, Mike, this is going to be painful, but you have to know before you can be moved into the ward with the rest of the inmates." He held up a small mirror so Michael could see himself. Disbelief filled his eyes, and Michael wondered how what he was seeing could be true. They had shaved all of his hair off, including his eyebrows, and there were multiple patches with wires stuck all about his head, which ran off to a bundle that wandered away from the base of his neck. Around his neck was what looked to be a black leather collar, connected to some sort of rubber sheet which was in turn fastened to the tabletop his head protruded from. There were small silver bolts in the circumference of the leather collar, and there was no doubt in his mind that they were actually attached to him in some manner. He looked from the mirror to Marco and back again. Now Marco moved the mirror back a little to give him a broader view, and Michael was horrified. He could see the edge of the tabletop under him now, and below it, instead of his body, was a vat of clear liquid only a few inches deep. Now he understood what Marco was trying to tell him, and he looked at the man as if he held some answer that would take the horror away. "I'm sorry, Mike. Like I said, I did not think any crime deserves for this to happen to you." He put the mirror down. "But that was your body I just took to the furnace." Marco got up and rolled the stool over by the wall. "I have to go and check on the others now, but I'll be back in a couple hours." He went out the door he had first entered, and Michael listened as the sound of his footsteps faded away. His mind was numb, and he could not think. He wanted to scream and yell and rage at the world about how he had endured so much without ever once acting in any way to justify what was happening to him, and now they had done this to him. They had taken his body and mounted his head on a plate like a trophy. A living trophy. Michael looked over at the monitor and looked directly at the painkiller icon. He blinked twice, feeling immediately as the narcotic began to flow freely into his brain, numbing his thoughts and senses. He looked again and saw the monitor was now counting down from 2 hours, but still tried to administer another dose. If he could somehow overdose, the nightmare would end. But the machine refused to respond, and he was left to stare blankly at the counter as it worked its way down to his next dose. Thank you for spending your time with me. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join the conversation. There's a lot more to this story than what's here. A lot happened in the 20 or so chapters before this story, and a lot more happens after this. You can find out by reading the whole book, Eternal Convictions. It's available on Amazon.com. Or message me, and I'll arrange to send you a signed copy. That's all for now, but I'll be back again soon with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.